Hey, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're at. Uh, Today, I want to talk a little bit about the hidden problem driving high blood pressure. If I can get in my pocket and get this out and get this out of my ear. I want to talk about the hidden problem driving high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, belly fat, poor sleep, fatigue, and what it is that really is the driver behind most of that. I really wish someone had told me this many years ago because it would have saved me a lot of years of frustration. It wasn't but almost 2 years ago that my son was carrying around a bottle just like this in my office. And finally, after about a week, I asked him, "What is that?" And when he told me what it was and what it does, I was a little frustrated because at the time I was 57. Man, I had chronic fatigue. After lunch, by the afternoon, I crashed and I wished I could go home and have a nap. That's how tired I would get. I was about 35 pounds overweight. I was pre diabetic. I had high blood pressure, and I was just didn't feel good. I'd been prescribed medications, and I was just frustrated. And one of the biggest frustrations that I had, honestly, was, I had grandkids that were between 6 months and 2.5. And, if they come over and visit and you just don't have the energy to play with them, that is frustrating. And so when he explained what that drink was, I started it the very next day. And my normal daily routine, as embarrassed as I am to say this today, was first thing in the morning, I would get up, drive to Starbucks, and get me a very sugary caramel macchiato. That was what I did for really 7+ years. And that was usually very early in the morning because I had very poor sleep. I would get up 3, sometimes 4 times a night just to go to the bathroom. And I don't know if you're experiencing that, but that is frustrating as all hell. And so I started that drink the following day. And within 48 hours, man, I had consistent energy. Those crashes were gone. And I felt a lot better. And a few weeks later, I noticed my sleep had improved. I was getting up maybe once and a few nights a week, not at all. Man, and that was a huge deal. That was a game changer for me. And then I noticed a month or so later that a few skin tags that I had disappeared. I had never known what caused skin tags, never even asked the question, nor did my doctor ever talk to me about it because the prior decade before this, I'd probably been to the dermatologist or my primary care to get a few skin tags clipped off. But when they disappeared, I was shocked. But on the 5th day after starting this protocol, I was blown away because I realized I hadn't gone to Starbucks, and I didn't finish that story every morning. So I'd go very early and then I'd go home, do a few things, little routine I had. By the time I showered and headed to my office around 8 o'clock, I would then stop at the convenience store on the corner by my office and get a 32-ounce Dr. Pepper. And on the 5th day, I realized I hadn't gone to Starbucks and I hadn't gotten a Dr. Pepper. That blew my mind because I didn't go into this thinking, oh, I'm going to start drinking this drink and I'm going to improve how I eat. I'm going to cut back on this. I'm going to stop drinking the sugary coffee and the sodas. I didn't do any of that, but it happened. That got my attention. So then I started to dig in and research quite a bit more. I picked up this book, Why We Get Sick, by Dr. Benjamin Bickman, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And I started to learn what was behind most chronic disease. I don't know if you've ever been to your doctor and he's done anything or she's done anything other than discuss with you the symptoms you have and then figuring out what medication would help with those symptoms. But that's what I had experienced, and I believe most people experience. I had never been asked about my diet what I could improve from a nutrition standpoint, or how I could maybe exercise more. Anything like that was never discussed. It was always what piece of paper could be filled out and handed to me to stop by the pharmacy on my way home. In fact, 3 weeks after I started this simple protocol, I did have an annual physical scheduled, and I didn't want to go, but out of respect for my doctor, who was a friend, my wife is a nurse of 30 years and had worked at that office for 30 years. And so I know I did go, and he started talking to me about my prediabetes and high blood pressure. And, I'm not a good patient anymore because I've done enough research over the last many years about a lot of things, and particularly the last 2 years into health and what drives most chronic disease. And so as he was talking to me, went over my blood pressure numbers and ordered the blood work, he types in his computer and comes back and tells me that because I told him I hadn't been taking my blood pressure med, lisinopril, because of the things I've learned. I believe from my own research, I'm not telling you what to believe. You should do your own research. But I've learned, and my belief is, there is no medications that were given to cure a problem. They're just to mask and deal with a symptom, which then leads to other problems down the road in most cases. Now, am I anti-medication? Absolutely not. Are there situations where they might be an absolute need? Yes. But when we're talking about blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes, fatty liver, weight, PCOS, ED, and many other things, that is not the case in most cases. There's an underlying issue. What is it? In full transparency, I was a drug addict for 14 years, addicted to opiates. I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease and had a 16-inch small bowel resection, and I got hooked on opiates. Why do I tell you that? Because addiction is real, but it's not because I was just a loser and an idiot and stupid that I continued to self-medicate. There was an underlying root cause. And until I was willing to, number one, admit there was a problem, but then number two, figure out what is that underlying cause that is causing me to think I need these pills to feel better. They were just masking the symptom, which was the underlying cause. So as addicts or alcoholics, whether it's to pills, sex, exercise, whatever addiction it is, until we figure out that underlying cause, we're going to have a hard time overcoming it. So that's why you see so much relapse, because there might be willpower and there might be desire. I was sick and tired of being sick and tired for years before I got sober. And I wanted to get sober for many years. But because I didn't realize and figure out what the root cause behind it was that much harder, because willpower alone is not going to do it in most cases, whether it's to addiction or whether it's diet and exercise, you name it. So going back to docs, they are trained to diagnose the symptom and provide us something to assist and improve that symptom, not to alleviate and get rid of the underlying cause. So when we realize this, we can understand what the cause is that's creating the symptom, we have a much better chance of improving the condition or absolutely getting rid of it in a lot of cases, in most cases. So as I continued at the doctor that day, he punched some things in on his computer because I told him I wasn't taking the lisinopril, and he began to tell me that I had a 16% higher risk of a stroke if I didn't take it. But if I took it, it would reduce it down to, like, I can't remember the numbers exactly. This is almost 2 years ago, down to 7 or 8%. Think about that. There was no discussion about what I could do other than a medication. But I was 3 weeks into starting this protocol. In fact, I had this bottle with me in the office, and I told him, because of all the stories that I had personally listened to, people I had talked to, as well as educating myself on what is the root cause. In fact, at the top of this, you can see Dr. Bickman says the hidden epidemic at the root of most chronic disease. And as you go through this book, it talks about what that is, and that's what we're here to talk about today. It is insulin resistance. Now, you might wonder, well, what is insulin resistance? Well, I'm going to explain that. To finish up on my story there, I did not take the doctor's advice, but I told him I believed that this protocol was going to help deal with the cause and bring my blood pressure down and change things so I wasn't pre-diabetic anymore. So fast forward the 5 days after I started, I told you what happened. And then 3 months later, I had my blood pressure checked. All of a sudden, instead of 166 over 116, we're looking at 120 over 74. And that's typically where it is, give or take 5. Now, there's a lot of misinformation out there about what is correct blood pressure. And to be honest with you, my belief is, from the research I've done, because in fact, it's changed so much in the last many decades. I'm going to pull up the numbers because I put out some information about this not long ago. And it says in 1970, what was considered normal is 160 over 95. Then in 85, 140 over 96. Then in 03, 120 over 80. And then recently this year, in 2026, 110 over 70. Well, what I've learned from researching literally the past week, because of that information I had received that I put out some information on, I wanted to make sure, what is it? What really should it be? And why are these changes? I mean, just use common sense. Why have the numbers changed over the decades for blood pressure and also cholesterol? If you use common sense, there can really only be one reason. It's all about this. Big pharma is a big monster. A healthy patient is a lost patient. A healthy patient is lost revenue. So blood pressure, from what I've researched and believe today, should be the diastolic or systolic should be 110 plus half your age. So in my case, I'm almost 60. That would be 140. And then anything below 100, the diastolic, is fine. We get so hung up on numbers, and then when we're told what the numbers are, as crazy as this sounds to many, we just buy in to what authority figures are taught. But I'm not going to make this podcast about conspiracy theories or anything like that, but I'd just say, do your research, ask questions. That's the most powerful thing we can do, is ask questions and ask them to ourselves and do our own research. Because things changed a lot in the between 1915 and 1920, when the AMA came around, and who funded that, and how all that came about, and how things have changed so much. So let's get back to how we can improve these chronic diseases. Ask yourselves, are statins necessary? What should we eat? Do you exercise? What supplements do you use? Those are important questions to ask. Now, when I started asking different questions, as I've mentioned, instead of just asking what medication treats this, when you start asking what causes all of this, and then how you can get to fixing the cause, everything can change. So insulin resistance, what is it? It has a primary job, and that job is to move sugar out of your bloodstream and into your cells. That way it can be used for energy and stored later to be used as energy. But think of insulin like this. Every time that you eat, food is broken down into glucose, sugar basically, and which enters your bloodstream. And then your pancreas releases insulin. Insulin's a hormone, and it acts like the key that unlocks that cell so that it is absorbed in the cell. But when that key to the lock is gummed up, rusted out, you can't get the key in, then it can't be absorbed in the cell. So then it's stored as fat, or it's burned as energy then. So we need to become insulin sensitive so that our body functions the way it was meant to, so that glucose can be absorbed into the cells. Now, if your body needs energy right now, that glucose gets burned as fuel, as I mentioned. And if you don't need it right away, then it's stored in the muscles and in the liver as glycogen. But once those storage areas are full, the extra gets converted into fat for later use. So the problem starts when insulin has to knock on those cell doors over and over again. It can't get in, so insulin stays high all day long. Then eventually that cell stops responding. Your pancreas even makes more insulin to compensate, and that's what we call insulin resistance. And that's why energy crashes, hunger increases, blood sugar worsens, which leads to many other problems. Hey, John, how you doing? It's good to see you, man. Hope you're doing well. Comment 1 if anything you're hearing so far makes sense or has you thinking about asking other questions. So the questions that we can ask is, can type 2 diabetes improve? What about fasting? I get a lot. Fasting is phenomenal. In fact, this simple protocol I use calls for intermittent fasting. So when you can eat in an 8-hour window, and best is just 2 meals a day, we don't need breakfast. If you think about the word break fast, breakfast, that's really what you're doing after you've allowed your body to rest and reset and for glucose levels to come down, because obviously after you sleep, they're lowest in the morning. But as we've been taught, and a lot of things that I believed 8 years ago was eating every 2 to 3 hours to keep my metabolism burning. And I lost weight doing that, but my metabolic health didn't improve. And the only reason I lost weight is because I was so calorie deficient. I was only taking in 1,400 calories a day. Now that does work for weight loss, but what I've learned with this protocol and fixing my insulin resistance, I was able to lose 30 pounds in just under 4 months without extreme dieting or exercise. In fact, I didn't eliminate sugar and I didn't eliminate carbs. And here's actually a before and after of what I looked like. And that was simply by just adding this simple protocol to my daily routine. Again, no added exercise and no big shift in diet. Here's a list of the things that insulin resistant can impact. It's a huge list. Your short-term symptoms can be belly fat, obesity, unexplained weight gain, tired after eating, which I've discussed, low energy, fatigue, low endurance, increased hunger. And as I mentioned earlier, that's what really shocked me is my cravings for sugar literally disappeared. In fact, one of the things my wife occasionally would get at the grocery store is a glazed croissant, which I loved. I loved the texture of them as much or more than the glaze on the croissant, but that's a very sugary thing, and I love those. And I remember when I started this protocol, it was a couple of weeks, maybe 3, there was a couple of those croissants on the counter, and it didn't even faze me. Again, just like the Dr. Peppers and the caramel macchiato not being something I thought of or cared to have anymore, the same thing happened with those croissants. So this protocol works, and it helps the body become insulin sensitive again. I mentioned the skin tags, they disappeared. Brain fog, irritability, anxiety, depression, short-term memory loss. A lot of people with headaches and migraines particularly have seen huge improvements. I mentioned the sleep, how that improved for me quite a bit. Well, a ton actually. Then my high blood pressure is totally normal again. And some of those long-term symptoms, women with PCOS, men with ED, low testosterone, have seen amazing results. I've talked about the prediabetes, type 2 diabetes. Got some amazing, amazing stories about neuropathy. In fact, I wish I'd have had it ready for you and I would have read what it said. Give me just a second. I'm not going to be able to share it, but I'll read you this. Steve, I just watched the Zoom call and it's very impressive. I want to share with you the things I've noticed just in the 2 weeks I've been on the protocol. My neuropathy has also shown considerable improvement. I was not extremely bad like some people, but the numbness and tingling have been getting worse over the past year or two. And I would say it is now about half of what it was just in the past 2 weeks. The swelling in my feet and ankles is almost completely gone. This is amazing because right before I started taking this protocol, my feet and ankles were very swollen and now almost normal. Now that's incredible. And that is the kind of thing that is fulfilling as heck when you can really see a true impact on other people by something you simply share because you believe in it. Inflammation is a huge thing. Heart and cardiovascular health. In fact, there's a lot of science behind this protocol that I've used. Over 20 clinical studies, and one was done by the Cleveland Clinic, the #2 cardiovascular hospital in the world. It's truly is remarkable. But gout, so many other things. In fact, here's a little diagram that shows you many of the things that insulin resistant can impact. I've touched on many of them, but you can just take a look at that yourself and see the many different things that come from being insulin resistant. Did you know that 93% of Americans don't even know that they're insulin resistant? That's pretty staggering. Well, excuse me, I should say 93% of adult Americans are insulin resistant, and a large portion of that number aren't even aware of it because the underlying signs they don't know relate to insulin resistance, such as skin tags or dark patches on the skin, around the neck, the underarms, the groin. If you have any of those dark patches, even on the knuckles or elbows, that comes from insulin resistant. So most people don't have a medication deficiency. It's a metabolic health problem. Again, I want to welcome everyone that is just joining. Appreciate you being here. We're talking about insulin resistant and how we can become insulin sensitive again. Some of the biggest things that you can do is walking after you eat. You know, if you just go for a 15, 20-minute walk after you eat, that has a positive impact. Prioritizing protein and fiber before you eat. Excuse me. That those are also great things to do. If you really look at the foods that we have access today, unless you're growing your own food, it's highly processed. The fiber is stripped out of everything. So I don't know about you, but I don't think anybody wants to be on medications if you don't need them. Imagine if a smoke alarm were going off over and over in your house. You could just keep replacing the batteries, or you could figure out the cause. Where's the fire? What is the problem? Some of the common signs I've addressed. How many of those common signs of insulin resistance do you have? 1, 2? I think I had 5 or 6 of those signs. So I was very insulin resistant and for many years and didn't even know it. But once I learned about insulin resistance, changed a few things. I started to hydrate first thing in the morning with that yerba mate tea, which is what's in this protocol. I added fiber 4 meals, and I only ate twice in an 8-hour window. I eliminated the snacking. Again, I didn't completely eliminate sugar. It's almost impossible to do when you really research and see how much sugar is in things like, for example, ketchup or bread. When you look at how much sugar in there, it's a ton. So yeah, I eliminated the sugary drinks, didn't care for the glazed croissants, things like that, which is positive. But I didn't, just research everything I was eating and seeing there was sugar and eliminate it. That's almost impossible in the world we live in. And I didn't cut out carbs. I still lost 30 pounds and got my body to be insulin sensitive again. So some of the many big lessons that I've learned is fat isn't always the problem. Sugar isn't the whole story either. We do need insulin. That matters. Fiber matters. Walking after meals helps. Good sleep is a huge thing related to health. So if you're getting up 3 and 4 times like I was, you're not getting quality sleep. And that continues to compound and create problems. But the small daily habits beat the extreme diet and extreme exercise every time. The compound effect is real. Sometimes it seems overwhelming when we're looking to make a change in something and looking out into the future to where we want to be by making a change. But it seems so massive and so big that we often don't start. But if you focus one day at a time and do the simple little things, a few of the things I just mentioned, the walking after you eat, fiber and protein before you eat, trying to get better sleep, those little things compound. But because we live in such a crazy convenient society, if we don't see results quickly, we often don't stick with things until that compound effect starts to kick in. That's why a simple protocol that I thank God to my son, I became aware of versus the extreme dieting, cutting out all of these different things that are hard to do, willpower, a lot more exercise every day. That's a lot harder than adding a simple science-backed protocol that actually helped make the willpower disappear and it just kind of became automatic. Now, am I going to sit here and say everyone's going to have the exact same results as me? No. But I can tell you there's thousands and thousands of people around the world having these kind of results. In fact, I want to share an amazing story with you, one that I saw just a couple of days after I started the protocol that really was mind-blowing. And this gal's name is Claudia. So just listen to this, just 1 minute.
At age 50, my doctor kept wanting me to take a statin. I didn't want to. And finally, he talked me into trying Lipitor. It was new on the market. And within 3 weeks, I woke up one morning and I did not have legs. I could not stand. It turned out to be neuromuscular disorder. I gained like 59 pounds in 3 weeks. That's when I became type 2 diabetic. The blood sugars went sky high and they never came back down. I wanted to die. I was hurting so bad. Of course, was on metformin. And then another year after that, I started the Trulicity. I met a new doctor that I had never seen before. And she walked in the room and abruptly said, your A1C is 10.4. And I came home. I was sitting back in my bedroom and I was very depressed, very upset. I picked up my iPad and I was looking on Facebook, and someone had posted a TikTok video talking about this protocol. And I said, what have I got to lose? I ordered it that day. I started on it on October the 11th last year. By December, I had to quit taking the Trulicity because my blood sugars time I had lost 37 pounds and my A1C was 5.1. I felt so much better too. I'm off of all medicine. My cholesterol was always like 386. Now, as of April, it was 226. I'm just so fun.
Pretty amazing, huh? I mean, I don't know how many of you would like to have the kind of results that Claudia had, but that picture of her before she had lost the weight, then getting off all medications. Got another lady named Sherry, got off 17 medications, was type 2 diabetic, no longer diabetic. It's truly remarkable. So if you're interested in, what it is I'm taking, I'm happy to share that with you. You can send me a DM or you can check out the links. Actually, you can just go to any of my profiles on my socials and you'll see right here. You can get information there. It's the same on any of my social profiles. You can just go there. In fact, you can get a free blueprint that talks about a lot of these things. So if you're interested, just go check that out and get the information there. I want to welcome everyone again who's here and who's continued to stay, and those that have joined. I get a lot of people ask me every day, can type 2 diabetes improve? Absolutely. I've seen it time and time again. So if today's conversation made you realize you've been treating symptoms instead of asking what's causing them, just comment root, or like I said, send me a message, or you can just go to my social profiles and get more information and grab the free blueprint. As I mentioned earlier, there's nothing more fulfilling than helping somebody, whether it's with health, personal life, it doesn't matter what it is. There's no amount of money that gives me, and I think most people, the feeling of when you help somebody else. That's the most fulfilling feeling, I think, that's out there. So if I can change just one more life, that's good enough. But I want to help million lives around the world. That's how important it is that we take back control of our health, because it's just gotten totally out of hand. I don't know if any of you saw what took place yesterday with a new executive order that came out regarding these things that you get. I'm trying to be careful what I say. I don't know which platforms may censor this if I say the V word, but 72 of these for children, that's absolutely insane. God gave us a body, and I believe everything on this planet that is needed for it to take care and heal itself, as long as we're putting the right things in it. There is no logical explanation why autism has gotten totally out of control the last few decades, last 2 or 3 in particular, versus what it was 50 years ago. I believe it was like 1 in 32,000. Now it's like 1 in 11 or 1 in, I can't remember the numbers, but they're crazy. We need to take control of our own health and stop just listening to somebody in a position of authority. I'm not saying that you blow that off by any stretch, but we have to start asking questions, and asking questions. Where did they get their information? They were taught it. Do you know how many hours in medical school are taught on nutrition? It's not even a day. That's pretty messed up. That should tell us all we need to know. So I appreciate those of you that have been here. Again, shoot me a message if you have any questions at all. If there's any thing I can help you with, I'll be happy to. And we'll talk to you again shortly. Take care. Have a fantastic day.